Good afternoon. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for participating in our webcast this afternoon. My name is Roy Thomas. I'm going to be your moderator for the webcast. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions, and I see that some of you have already asked some questions. There's a question and answer tab on your screen. You're welcome to put a question in there at any time. The questions will go into queue, and we will answer them in sequence a little bit later on in the program. We have two presenters this evening, Jim Verrill, who is the Law Society's election officer and our Director of Policy and Tribunals, and Julia Bass, who is our Policy Counsel in the Policy Secretariat. So good evening to Julia and to Jim. And Julia, can I ask you to just say a couple words in French to begin with, please?
Absolutely. Bonsoir tout le monde. La présentation de ce soir sera uniquement en anglais, mais tous nos documents sont disponibles en français sur notre site web. Si vous avez des questions en français, veuillez les envoyer à nous par courriel. Merci.
Thanks, Julia. Jim.
Hi, Roy. I'm delighted that we have more than 140 licensed paralegals joining us tonight. On behalf of the Law Society, I want to welcome all of you and thank you for making time to be part of this webcast today. We thought that in addition to the material on our website and in the emails we sent to you, it would be useful to hold a webcast like this and to give you a chance to ask questions about any aspect of the nomination process or the role of the Paralegal Standing Committee members themselves.
Thanks, Jim. And I noticed that we've got a few more questions coming in, which is great. We will get to those shortly. I think before that, Jim, that there are some recent developments in the policy area that affect this election directly, and it'd be a good place for you to start speaking about them.
That's right, Roy. Back in April of 2013, Convocation, which is the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Law Society, decided that the 5 paralegals elected in this election process should be elected as benchers, rather than just as members of the Paralegal Standing Committee. Although, of course, they would also be members of that committee. Now, this requires an amendment to the Law Society Act, and I'm pleased to say that on October 1st, the Attorney General introduced Bill 111 that includes these amendments. We will watch the progress of this bill, but the important thing to remember is that candidates who run in this election may be elected as benchers. So when we speak of election to the Paralegal Standing Committee, please keep this development in mind.
So, Jim, Julia is going to talk about what the members of the Paralegal Standing Committee actually do after they're elected. But first, I thought it'd be good if you could remind us, remind all the participants, just in general, about the role of the Law Society itself.
Sure. And I think the context is quite important. We're talking about the election of 5 licensed paralegals to become members of the Paralegal Standing Committee. So they are elected to act on behalf of the public. They're part of the Law Society, which is here to protect the public interest by ensuring that lawyers and paralegals meet standards of learning, competence, and professional conduct that are appropriate for the legal services they provide.
And given that role, I should emphasize that the Law Society doesn't act on behalf of lawyers or on behalf of paralegals. That's what organizations like the Paralegal Society of Ontario and the Ontario Bar Association do. That's really a different role. The Law Society governs lawyers and paralegals on behalf of the citizens of Ontario. It's important to remember this if you're elected. Members of the Paralegal Standing Committee have a duty to act in the best interests of the Law Society, which means being true to the Law Society's mandate to govern in the public interest, as Jim has said, and also to avoid conflicts of interest between your role as a paralegal and your role at the Law Society.
So the election itself is going to be held in March of 2014. But for all of those of you on the call today, really the key date you should be keeping in mind is January the 17th, 2014. And that's the deadline for the Law Society to receive candidate nominations. So let's start there. Jim, what do candidates actually have to submit by January 17th?
Roy, every candidate must be nominated on the form provided by the Law Society, and that form can be downloaded from the Law Society's website. There are candidate instructions on the website as well. Now, each candidate must be nominated by at least 5 licensed paralegals whose licenses are not suspended at the time of signing the nomination form. There's actually space for 7 signatures, and we think it would be wise to obtain more than 5 signatures in case there is a problem with one of your nominators. You must send me the nomination form with the signatures. The original form should be delivered to me, but it can also be faxed or scanned and emailed. And I would strongly urge you not to leave things until the last minute. As Roy said, nominations close at 5 p.m. on January 17, 2014. I check each nomination form as it comes in and acknowledge them. And if there's a problem with one, I will tell you, and you will have an opportunity to fix it, but only if the nominations haven't closed.
So the nomination form is part of the nomination package, but the candidate actually has to submit more than just the form, right?
Yes, and in addition to that form, they should submit a color photo, a biographical statement of not more than 120 words, and an election statement of not more than 350 words.
Okay, and are all these things to be submitted in the same package as the nomination form?
No, the photo and biographical statement and election statement are all to be submitted electronically, and you can do that in 2 ways. We provided an online form that looks like the page we will publish in the voting guide, which I'll talk about a bit later. And you can use this form to provide your biographical information and the election statement. You can email that form and the photo in electronic format to paralegalelection@lsuc.on.ca. If you don't use the form, you must submit the electronic files by email or deliver a USB memory stick containing the files. Now, the photo is to be a color photograph showing your head and shoulders, and the image size must be a minimum width of 1,500 pixels or 5 inches, a minimum height of 7 inches or 2,100 pixels, and with horizontal and vertical resolution of 300 pixels. The image must be in JPG, TIF, or EPS file format. No PDF files, please. And the 2 statements must be in Microsoft Word format. Again, we won't accept a PDF file. And the word count, as I said, is a fixed limit, a maximum of 120 words for the biographical statement, including headings, and a maximum of 350 words for the election statement, also including headings.
Okay, I'm almost sorry I asked. That's a lot of detail to remember. I'm sure nobody wrote it all down and got it all there. However, it's all explained on the website. All those instructions, details that Jim just went over, you'll find on the website, and our email address is there as well, correct?
Yes, but one more thing I wanted to mention, Roy.
Okay.
One more detail. And it's important that you include your name on all the file names. For example, call your file Vero Jim Photo. Don't call it just Photo, or we won't be able to identify it, and then we won't be able to use it. I should also note that we will not include in your election statement any material that may be libelous, in bad taste, or may be a breach of the paralegal rules of conduct. And again, I urge you to get this material to us in advance of the deadline of January 17. As we've already said, you'll appreciate the amount of detail in each nomination package. We have to check it all. And if there are mistakes or things missing that we don't find until after the deadline, it will be too late to fix them, and your nomination won't stand. If the material for the voting guide is not filed in time, it will not affect the nomination.
Okay. You got all that? So this is not the time to tell us about what your ideas are for Senate reform, okay? 2 parts to the nomination package, and one is to be delivered either in hard copy or by fax, electronic form, and the other one to be delivered in electronic form. 5 p.m. January 14th, absolute deadline.
17.
Sorry, 17th. 5 p.m. January 17th. Realistically, you really should plan to have your material in well before then. The nomination form and all the instructions, as I said before, already available on our website. They're on the website today on the paralegal pages. If you follow the little graphic, the Paralegal Election logo, which is on your screen right now, I think, or will be, You'll also find that on our website. Good way to find things related specifically to the election. So, back to Jim. When you've received all the nomination forms, all the photos and the statements, all by January 17th, what happens then?
Then we produce what we call a voting guide that will be online throughout the election. Each candidate will have exactly the same format in the guide with their photo and their biographical statement and their election statement on one page. You can see a sample candidate page in the nomination package online now. If you don't use the online form for your biographical information and election statement, please don't format your material that way. We will do the formatting. The sample page is included only as an illustration of how the finished guide will look, Roy.
Okay. We're getting there. I think we've summarized the nomination process. If we've missed something, please ask us in a moment when we're going to take your questions. I'm going to answer one of them really quickly because I see it's popped up here already. What's wrong with PDF files? We can't edit them, format them, and properly lay them out in the election guide. So PDF files are not going to work. Now, let's take a look for a minute about the role of elected paralegals, their duties, the time commitment, which is a pretty critical thing that you do need to consider carefully, and remuneration, also another critical thing to look at. Julia.
Thanks, Roy. The candidates elected in March will become members of the Paralegal Standing Committee. There are also 5 lawyer benches and 3 lay benches on the committee for a total of 13 members. The elected paralegals will attend monthly meetings of the committee to work on all the rules and policies governing paralegal practice in Ontario for recommendation to convocation. But in addition to the meetings of the Paralegal Standing Committee, if you're elected, you will sit as an adjudicator to consider cases related to licensing, competence, conduct, and capacity of licensees. You'll also be invited to participate on other Law Society committees, task forces, or working groups. All elected paralegals are also invited to attend convocation each month. While usually only benches attend this meeting, the Treasurer has extended an invitation to all paralegals to attend.
So it's a 4-year term that you're competing for and that you will be elected for. Julia, I want to ask you to go back a little bit on the actual time commitment. It's 4 years. You've hinted at it already, but can you give us a bit more detail, please?
Well, there's quite a range, Roy. Some members may serve on more committees or sit on more hearings than others. But on average, an elected paralegal should plan on a commitment of at least 2 or 3 days a month. And there are usually no committee meetings in March, July, and August.
Okay. And of the 5 elected paralegal members, 2 of them are going to become benchers of the Law Society, right?
Yes, if Bill 111 hasn't passed by then. In which case, the first thing on the agenda of the Paralegal Standing Committee after the election, which will be in April, will be to choose the 2 paralegal benches. In that case, all 5 elected paralegal members and the 3 lay benches will elect 2 of the elected paralegals to become benches. Paralegal benches have full voting rights at convocation, in addition to the current invitation to attend and take part in debates. As Jim mentioned, the bill introduced in October will change the process so that all 5 elected paralegals automatically become benches, in addition to being members of the committee.
Okay. I think we kept the best piece till last. Jim, what do you get paid if you're a paralegal bencher?
Well, we call it remuneration, Roy, and elected paralegal members become eligible for that from the Law Society after contributing 26 days in the year. They are remunerated on the same basis as benchers, and this includes attending meetings, adjudicator education sessions, sitting on hearing and appeal panels, and travel time. Now, if you're attending a meeting by telephone, that is also eligible for remuneration. The rate is $565 per day and $340 per half day, which is 3 hours or less. They are also reimbursed for reasonable expenses incurred while on Law Society business, such as parking.
Okay, and just to be clear, the remuneration doesn't begin until a paralegal member has served 26 days, right?
That's right, Roy. Again, this is on the same basis as benchers. You're eligible for remuneration after contributing 26 days to Law Society business in a year. Half days and full days count as 1 day of attendance for this purpose until the 26-day requirement is exceeded. And these 26 days, Roy, are considered to be the paralegal's contribution to the profession.
Okay. And as you've already said, it's exactly the same terms under which lawyers are elected and serve as benchers.
Right.
Yep. Okay. So we're now going to turn to questions. We have a number that you've asked already that are in queue, and so we're going to take those one at a time off the top. So, and have I got the first one here? What is the realistic amount of days to be an active member? Oh, sorry. Is that the first one, or should I go to one of the others? Somebody just flipped this one. So let me start with this one. My understanding from some of the present members of the Paralegal Standing Committee is that they're giving 60-plus days a year in terms of their service. Is that an accurate reflection, Julia?
Well, that's certainly accurate, that a number of the current elected paralegals have really made a tremendous contribution to Law Society business in excess of 60 days a year. That isn't required, but obviously it's very helpful and makes an outstanding impression on the Law Society generally, that paralegals are committed and work so hard on behalf of the paralegal profession.
Okay, so could you break it down to, again, another question, a realistic amount of days to be an active member of a committee?
Well, the Paralegal Standing Committee only usually meets once a month, and Convocation usually meets once a month. So those 2 days, I guess you could say, would be the absolute minimum, but all of the elected paralegals are invited to be on other committees as well. So that would often add another day, and then there are frequently working groups and task forces in addition to that, and of course that's all before you get to being a member of the hearing panel, and that's very unpredictable. But the way that works is that every member of the hearing panel is asked to provide in advance a list of which days they're available. So people will not be suddenly summoned when they're in court or at an inconvenient time. They are asked to contribute days. And of course, as everybody dealing with the law knows, cases are unpredictable and sometimes cases take longer than expected.
Right, right. Okay, thank you. Why do candidates need to have 5 other paralegals sign the application? Isn't this excessive? Isn't this also prejudicial to new paralegals? Jim, do you want to try that one?
Sure, Roy. The reason we require at least 5 paralegals to nominate a candidate is we want to make sure that the particular candidate to be nominated has the support of at least 5 of your peers in the paralegal community. Yeah, I would suggest that it's not excessive given the number. And while there may be some issue as to who a new paralegal may know in the community, I would suggest that a minimum of 5 people is an appropriate number. And again, a bylaw requirement that we think is appropriate for this purpose.
Okay. Here's a simple one. What about passport photos? Would they work?
I don't believe so because I think they're too small. That's not 5 by 7 as far as I know. So no, I think the requirements that are set out on the website and as I relate tonight are the requirements that we would require for the appropriate resolution for the photo.
Okay, and again, all of those details are on the website. I realize that We kind of threw a lot of detail at you in a hurry, so please refer to the website for those. The question we already answered, spoke to about PDF files. I think we've explained why we're not prepared to accept PDF files. The formats that we will accept are there on the website. Next question. Can you be on a board of one of the associations as well as a member of the Paralegal Standing Committee?
The short answer is yes, but perhaps Julie could elaborate on that.
Well, I think, again, it really goes to the issue that it's safer to not put yourself in a situation where you might feel that you have divided loyalties or conflict of interest, because the elected paralegals are in a fiduciary relationship to the Law Society. They have an obligation to work within the mandate of the Law Society, which is to serve the public interest. And it really, I think it would make it easier for the members of the committee to know that they have one clear mandate.
Okay, thank you. A question about travel expenses. Can travel expenses to Toronto for attending convocation be claimed?
Yes.
Great, and I think travel expenses to attend committee meetings or hearings as well.
That's right.
Okay. Next, I have two questions. First, are the elections based regionally? Jim?
No, they're not. Unlike the lawyer bencher election, we don't have regions for the paralegal election.
Okay. And the second, is there a start date for campaigning?
I suppose it's up to the individual candidate. Typically, candidates would start campaigning once nominations have closed and prior to the opening of voting, which would be in the early part of March. But again, it's up to each individual candidate as to what they wish to do in terms of campaigning. So there is no set date for the start of campaigning.
Okay, thank you. Julia, maybe for you, are there any minimal requirements for the paralegal?
For the elected paralegals,
Right.
Minimum requirements in terms of time?
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's
it's not specified.
not specified. If that's what the question means, I mean, that isn't written down anywhere, but really this is a question of the paralegal profession having the best possible representation on the issues of the day. And I think, my own concern would be if someone is really worried about the minimum requirement, and I know everybody's busy, but, some people may be too busy for it to be realistic. We do recognize that this is a very serious contribution. I'm full of admiration for the way in which our elected paralegals serve on so many committees and task forces. They serve on the hearing panel, and I think ideally it would be good if people feel that they are in a position to provide more than the minimum service.
Okay, thank you. Jim, are current committee members permitted to run again? And if so, how many times can they run?
Yes, they are. There's a term limit, as for lawyer benchers, of 12 years cumulatively for the members of the Paralegal Standing Committee. And as we're only coming to the second election of elected paralegals, the incumbents, if they chose, could run in 2 further elections for the total of 12 years. They've already served 4 years. They could serve another 8 years.
And can a paralegal with 1 year's experience realistically be on the standing committee? I think you touched on that a little bit, but you might want to elaborate a bit.
There's no requirement written anywhere. I have been struck at a number of the paralegal receptions that I've been to that some of our newly licensed paralegals are in fact very interesting people with very extensive careers prior to becoming licensed. So I think it's certainly the case that there are paralegals who are recently licensed who are not 19 years old and have no life experience. So I think really it is equivalent to joining an important board of directors. So I think you're really looking for people with some maturity and some life experience and some ideas. But I think given that paralegals have not been licensed for very long, it probably isn't reasonable to assess that only on the basis of how long people have been licensed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I want to try and decipher the next question. If I don't get it right, I'll invite whoever submitted it to resubmit it, but because it's a little cryptic. It says market material is the guidelines. I'm assuming you mean marketing material, and are there guidelines? If that isn't what you wanted to ask us, please feel free to re-ask. So Jim, I know we have some guidelines for our lawyers and paralegals generally about marketing. Can you summarize those?
Sure. I mean, they're not specifically set out in the bylaw requirements, and if this is in the context of campaigning, pretty much anything, any vehicle you wish to use to campaign, any form of advertising is acceptable. You have to comply, however, with the paralegal rules of conduct, and in particular, not create anything that would be offensive, in bad taste. We have our rules around the election statement in the bylaw, and I would suggest that you translate that to whatever campaign material you might be creating for a campaign and be guided by what's set out in the bylaw for those purposes in any kind of campaign for your candidacy.
Okay, so again, if I didn't get your question right, I'll invite you to resubmit. Next, excuse me. Next question is: can my nominators be lawyers?
No, they can't be. They must be licensed paralegals. That's set out clearly in the bylaw and in our material on the website. So no lawyers can nominate a paralegal candidate.
Okay. Can we provide an average number of hours per month in terms of this commitment? I know that it's difficult to quantify, but do you have any sense of the number of hours per month?
I'm not sure I can do better than I have already. It's really a minimum of I would say two working days a month. But I think some of our members have found that that is actually really a minimum.
Right, right. Okay. And again, are there a minimum number of years of service required?
I think I've already
you've
handled
answered that one.
I think that's really a similar question to the other one.
Yeah. Okay. On the nomination form, there are 7 spaces for nominee names. Can those people be counsel or paralegals only? I think Jim has already, but you might want to repeat that one. How many nominee forms may we submit? Are these people to know me on a working level only? Jim.
Well, as the bylaw says, the nominators must be licensed paralegals whose licenses are not suspended at the time they sign your nomination form. So they can be a paralegal anywhere in Ontario as long as those requirements are met. Of course, I expect that a nominator isn't going to nominate a candidate unless they actually know the candidate, so I would suggest that it's going to be people you know who will be your nominators. The nomination form requires a minimum of 5 nominees with their address, signature to be dated, etc. You'll see it on the nomination form. You can submit as many as you wish. We will only proceed to review it until we have received confirmation that at least 5 nominees are valid, and then it doesn't really matter about the rest of them. But as I said earlier, it's best to provide probably more than 5 just in case there is a problem with one of your nominators. So again, no minimum except for the 5, but it's up to each candidate as to how many nominators they really wish to have file with us.
Okay. Thank you. Can instructors serve on the Paralegal Standing Committee? Are there any potential conflicts for instructors who teach at the colleges that are accredited for paralegal training or for CPD, or those who provide licensing exam-related material for students? Is that something you want to try on, Jim?
Well, again, if they're a licensed paralegal that fits within the requirements in the bylaw to be a candidate, they can be elected. As Julia said earlier, there may be some positions that might make it more difficult than not for a paralegal to serve fully on the Paralegal Standing Committee, depending on the policy questions that are going to be dealt with in any particular meeting or in any particular year. But I wouldn't say, again, as I said earlier, that automatically instructors in paralegal programs would be excluded. Juliette, I don't know if you have anything further to
Well,
add.
the one thing I would add to that is that because there is a project underway reviewing the nature of the paralegal education and training, I think there will be definitely issues arising from that coming before the Paralegal Standing Committee. So you would potentially have a situation where one of the elected members of the committee would have to recuse themselves from any discussion of that issue. So again, it might just put the person in an awkward position in terms of a potential conflict of interest, and then you have to sort of ask whether the paralegal profession is well served if not every member of the committee can deal with every issue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right. All right. So we have one question left. If you have just thought of a question now, you still have a minute or two to enter it in that tab that says Q&A on your screen. The last one we have right now says, can you explain how you want the forms filled, especially the nomination form? So I know we've gone over that, Jim, in a bit of a hurry. Maybe you might want to just touch on the highlights of that again.
Sure. I'll just tell you a little bit about the history of this form from my experience as an election officer, which is not that extensive. We, for the first time this year, are permitting candidates to file the form electronically, that is scanned and emailed, or by fax, or in original form. So in the Q's and A's on the website, you might notice that we stress that it's always best to file the original form with original signatures, and that's simply because you can never go wrong doing that. Although we found in previous elections, and I'm talking now about the Bencher election in 2011, that we didn't seem to come up with a very good reason to prohibit members, licensees that is, from filing forms by fax or electronically, as long as they were legible. And so to that end, we are permitting it this year. So really, it's up to you. As I said, the preference is for the original form with the original signatures, but if you choose to scan and email, that's fine. If you do the nominations piecemeal, that is, if you have nominators that are in dispersed geographic areas, for example, that you want to nominate you and a name comes in separately from another name on the form, it's best to indicate the candidate's name at the top of that form, just so we know from whom the nomination is coming and for whom. So that's the only caution I would urge with respect to the nomination form that might come in parts, so to speak.
Okay. So we have gone through the list of questions that we've received. Sorry? There's one more? Okay. You'll have to tell me what it is because it's not showing up at the end of my list.
Oh, there's.
Do you have it, Jim?
Well, there is one question about the 26 days, which I don't think we've answered. So the question is, if 26 days are being donated, do elected members have to do CPD? The answer is yes, and there really isn't a relationship between the 26 days and the CPD requirement. So that's the way I'd put that. So the answer is yes.
Okay, do we have any more questions?
Yeah, they're at the top. So we have another question. I'm a new paralegal, just became licensed last year. I have not yet practiced as I continue with my education after licensing. Would this be something suitable for me to pursue? That's a decision you're going to have to make as a newly licensed paralegal. Given what we've talked about in terms of the commitment required, that you'll have to examine basically what's best for you in terms of your career at this stage, I would say.
Okay, my license was suspended for not completing my reports in time. It was suspended for 1 month. Can I still run?
Yes, as long as the license has been reinstated. So the requirement in the bylaw is that a candidate must have a license that is not suspended at the time they are nominated. So if your license is currently in good standing, so to speak, you can become a candidate.
Okay. Are there any financial limitations on one's campaign?
No, there aren't.
Okay.
As I said earlier, we really don't have rules around campaigning other than the rules that would apply, as I mentioned earlier, to being mindful of good taste and that type of thing, which we do have in place for the election statement.
Okay. Is there any consideration for applicants based on their area of expertise? Julia, you might want to talk to that one a bit.
No, that has never been prescribed. I think we've been very fortunate that we've had, up to now, we've had a very good range of areas of expertise amongst the elected paralegals, but I think it's interesting. I know in some other jurisdictions, legal regulators actually elect people by area of practice. But that isn't really the concept here. And I think although there are now over 5,000 licensed paralegals, it's still, in the great scheme of things, not a huge number. And I think rather than dividing it, I think to just let people be elected on the basis of who gets the most votes seems to be reasonable, and that seems to have worked so far.
Okay. Can a nominator be on a 50% rate? So regarding their license, as an example, someone on maternity leave, can they be a nominator?
Yes, their license is in good standing, so to speak. At the time they sign the nomination form, yes, they can be a nominator.
Okay, thank you. Do all your nominations need to be on one sheet, or do I fax my original copy to an individual that is out of town to get them to sign it?
Well, I would suggest that you get an original signature on any nomination form, and then you can send that to me as the elections officer. I wouldn't suggest faxing your nomination form for signature and then having that faxed back, because you're actually duplicating an electronic copy. So I think you'd want to control that a little bit more carefully in terms of getting the signature, an original signature on an original form.
Okay. How soon can an individual start marketing that they are running? I think you answered that already. Can they use Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. to advertise?
Yes. As I said earlier, campaigning is really up to the candidate. They can use any form of media they wish. So, sure.
Okay. Why is the regional aspect not looked at as they do for lawyers. The needs of different regions vary widely, as they do for lawyers. So a supplementary to that, where might I access voting results from the last election? I'm going to break those down and talk about the regional one first.
Sure. I want Julia to contribute to this answer
Okay.
as well. But I think because we have a fairly contained group of licensees in the paralegal community, so right now we have less than 6,000 province-wide, it would seem to me that at this stage, having regional elections would not be required to obtain the complement that is required for the 5 paralegals on the paralegal standing committee. I think in time it may be something we look at as the paralegal profession grows. I think this particular question relates to the system we have for the lawyer benchers who do have a regional scheme, although that wasn't from the start. That only came into place in 1995. So we only have about 6 elections or so experience with the regional scheme. Again, not saying that regional scheme may not ever happen for paralegals, but at this stage it's probably not required. Julia?
I don't think I would have a lot to add to that. I think it's a little bit like the issue about areas of practice. Paralegals are very diverse. Paralegal practice is diverse across the province, but I think the elected paralegals thus far have had a very good representation of different practice areas, different practice settings, and it's interesting that none of the currently elected paralegals is actually from the City of Toronto. So it's not one of those situations where everybody is all from the same place and everybody has the same sort of background. And I think at the moment, as Jim has kind of suggested, it's probably a bit early to move towards dividing up the election.
Right. Okay. And the second part of that was, where might I access voting results from the last election?
They should be on the election page on our website. They were archived, I understand, but we've asked to have them put back. So this would simply show the number of votes cast and the order in which the candidates finished back in 2010. And if they're not there, you can certainly email the Paralegal Election mailbox and I can provide that information to you.
Okay. Do we know how many paralegals are actually eligible to vote?
We won't know that until March because we freeze, so to speak, the voters list the first week in March. Right now, as I mentioned earlier, there's around 5,600 licensed paralegals. Now, all of those may not be eligible to vote depending on the suspension of licenses around the time we freeze the voters list, but that's roughly what we're talking about.
And how many votes were cast last time and how many voted? So I think if that archive page is back, that'll answer that question, right?
Yes, I don't actually recall the number of votes, I'm sorry.
I think the turnout was it 30% or
Yeah,
in
it
that
was a little bit
region?
less than 30%. So I'm thinking it was around, we had, I think, less than 2,500 licensed paralegals. So if Julie is correct, it was probably around the 800 mark.
So we'll do the math and encourage every one of you who are participating tonight to sign up, 10 of your friends and colleagues to vote,
yes.
and then we'll break the record from, we'll set a new record. Can I use more than 7 nominees?
Yes, you can.
My license was suspended for not completing my reports on time. I was suspended for 1 month. I think you've answered that one already.
Yeah.
If licensed paralegals wish to support a candidate but cannot sign the official form, can they write a separate letter with their information to form part of the candidate's application?
No, they can't. They must use the form for nominating a candidate on our website.
Okay. Can a paralegal be nominated first, then send in their photo and other information afterwards before the deadline?
Yes.
So we don't have to get everything all at the same time.
Right. As long as everything is received by January 17, 2014.
Okay. Do members of the Standing Committee have opportunities to amend some of the requirements for being eligible? For example, can they change the minimum number of signatures of nomination forms from 5, for example, to 3?
Sure. That would be an issue that would have to be raised with the Paralegal Standing Committee. It would require a bylaw amendment. Well, first it would require a decision by the committee to amend the election procedures. So if the decision wasn't made at the committee level, it probably wouldn't go much further. If it was made at the committee level, it would then be required to go to convocation, which is, as I mentioned earlier, the board of directors of the Law Society, where the 2 paralegals and 40-plus lawyer benchers sit for a decision. And then they would decide if it was appropriate to do so.
Okay. Julia, did you want to add to that, or is that?
No, I think
Okay.
that's accurate. Yeah.
You might like to take a go at this one. What's the nature of support and training offered by the Law Society as a newly elected member begins their term?
Well, we certainly try to give a very thorough orientation to all new elected governors, whether they're benchers or elected paralegals. We have very extensive briefing books. We have an orientation session where we try to make sure that everybody is well informed about the operations of the Law Society and the structure of the organization and so on. So that's part of, as a member of staff, this is part of our role, is to be as helpful as possible. And I would say if someone is knowledgeable about the issues with regard to paralegal practice, we would be more than happy to help orientate them with regard to the structure and issues at the Law Society.
Okay. Are you able to suggest when the Act will be amended and changed to include the 5 paralegals as full benchers?
Well, that would be lovely to be able to predict that, but the situation at the moment is that there is a minority government at Queen's Park, which is actually finding it quite difficult to get legislation passed. So it really is very difficult to predict. The one piece of good news is that when Bill 111 was introduced, it had enthusiastic support from all 3 political parties. So as far as we know, this is really an uncontroversial piece of legislation. There's no, that we know of, there is no particular controversy around it. It's just a question of House business and moving any legislation forward in a minority government.
Right, right. The next 2 questions are basically very similar. Can a person nominate many individuals? Can someone nominate more than 1 paralegal?
Yes and yes.
Why do nominations have to have Ontario addresses as long as the individuals are licensed in Ontario and practicing here?
Well, the easy answer is it's the bylaw requirement, but I suppose that's not going to be sufficient. I would suggest that we need to know that the paralegals that are supporting a candidate are here in Ontario, have a business address in Ontario, because by the same token, the candidate must be have a business address in Ontario. The connection to Ontario, I think, is quite important in terms of what we are expecting the elected paralegals to do here at the Law Society on the Paralegal Standing Committee, and if elected, a bencher in convocation.
One of our participants has just commented that the link for the 2010 votes isn't working. Please repair. So thank you for that. We will track that down and fix it. This is not a question. It's simply an appreciative word with respect to this session. I asked 3 questions, and all of them were answered. That's great. I'm glad to hear that.
That's very nice.
They were answered very well, he says.
So, well, hey, even better. We love compliments. That's great. Very kind of you to say that. So we have, I think, exhausted all your questions. You've been a great audience. Once I figured out to scroll down instead of up so that I could find the rest of the questions. Oh, one more. If Bill 111 happens after the election, good question, do the 5 paralegal standing committee members automatically become benchers?
Very good question. There are transitional provisions in the bylaws so that, yes, the short answer is that as soon as the bill passes, or very soon thereafter, all 5 elected paralegals will become benchers. In other words, we haven't got a race against time whereby either the bill passes before March 31st or it's too late. So we're hoping that it will be passed by March 31st. That would make everybody's life a lot easier. But if it isn't, that is not the end of the story, and there are transitional provisions so that the 5 will in due course become benches.
Okay, great. We have one more. Do current members of the Paralegal Standing Committee have to go through the same process as other candidates?
I'm assuming that means if they wish to be re-elected to the committee, do they have to do the same process as other candidates? And the answer is yes. They must get their 5 nominators. They must be nominated in accordance with the bylaw, meet the requirements, and be elected.
Great. So thank you very much to all of you who've participated. We've reached the end of our webcast this evening. I want to remind you once again that if you have additional questions, please send them to the Law Society Elections Officer by email, paralegalservices@lsuc.on.ca. You can call us, 416-947-3404, toll-free, 1-877-947-3404. You'll find all of that, email address and those phone numbers, on our website. You'll also find some frequently asked questions and, of course, all of the nomination forms. So, Jim and Julia, thank you very much. And once again, thanks to all of our participants. Good night.